So hi, just those people on the screen want to wave and say hi. We're just starting. It's a couple of minutes before before the lecture. About 2 minutes before we're due to start, and we might kind of start at sort of 5 past properly. Do a couple of minutes of talk in from Sunny and get her to introduce herself, and then kick off on our slides. We'll throw this recording up on Views and send you a link. We'll put it on YouTube and embed it. So just to repeat, once we kick off, we'll have a presentation from Sunny, where we'll keep everything sort of muted, and we'll do a screen share so everyone can follow along. Then we'll do Q&A, and you are welcome, though, in the interim to put any questions you have for the Q&A into the chat. So most of you, I think, by now are familiar with Zoom, but chat your questions. Yeah. Now everyone should see that. Hey, there's Sunny.
There's Sunny.
Hi, I'm here. How are you guys?
We're well.
All having fun in quarantine?
Yeah. Yeah, for
New
sure.
normal. Look, I'm just sending my presentation to you, Alex, and I wonder if it might just be easier for you to share with the group. I can also screen share if that's easier.
I can share. That's
but
cool.
Also, just given that it's quite boring to listen to somebody give a PowerPoint presentation via Zoom.
That's what we've been doing all semester, Sunny.
Okay, sorry. No comment on your
yeah, no, that's fine.
learning strategies. But yeah, so I was going to sort of pretty much flick through it. A lot of the slides in it are pretty self-explanatory. And look, for anybody on this chat who has further questions that, you know, or that if there's a slide you look at later on and you think, what the hell does that mean? I really, really, really need to know, like, feel free to contact me and I will have a chat to you about it. But yes, happy to kind of screen share as well.
Yeah, we'll circulate the slides and then we can share. And we've told the guys that you'll do a sort of whip through of the slides and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And we've got the Zoom chat thing, so we'll kind of take any questions by chat, take them on notice while you're going through the slides, and start with those in the Q&A. Yep. And then you know we'll sort of throw it open and just roll with it. So kind of whenever you're ready.
Well, why don't I introduce Sunny? Yeah. So to everyone who's joining and just joined us, this is Sunanda Creagh from The Conversation, who we call Sunny. And Sunny is the head of digital storytelling and the New South Wales Bureau Chief. Are those still your titles, Sunny? You always kind of seem like, I guess they're my titles.
Yeah, they are my titles. I mean, what the digital storytelling part means is just that do some podcasts and a bit of video and a little bit of data viz stuff as well, on top of the basic bread and butter of what we do at The Conversation is really text articles. So it's a bit of all of the above. Yeah. And
for anyone who doesn't know, one of the podcasts that Sunny does is a terrific one called Trust Me, I'm an Expert.
I'm not the expert. I interview the experts. Yeah.
No, and the one was it one of the Trust Me, I'm an Expert ones that you did earlier this week on coronavirus with the guy?
Yeah, 2 UTS people.
UTS.
Yep.
Yeah, that was really good. There's a really lovely translational moment in there at the beginning where I forget the woman's name, but she talked about the fatty layer around the lipids, the fats around the virus, and using soap just kind of pops the bubble, as it were. It was a really nice bit of translation.
Yeah, great. That's good. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. So just, am I safe to assume that you guys broadly know what The Conversation sort of is? I don't need to kind of go through the kind of who, where, why.
Yeah, we went through, we gave a bit of an overview last week.
Okay.
Talking about, you know, why knowledge translation today, and then what The Conversation is particularly.
Okay. Great. All right. So, you know, it's funded by universities. It's not for profit. It's free for readers. There's no paywall. It's free for other media to republish. And we think that's really important. Unlike other media who get really upset when other people do their stories, we sort of want our stories that we're published to be picked up as widely as possible. Importantly, most of our readers, 80% of our readers are not academics. We only publish academics, but most of our readers are ordinary folks. They're just, you know, their mums, their dads, their, you know, teachers, nurses, ordinary people just trying to sift through all the crap that's out there on the internet and get something that's evidence-based and some information that they can trust. You know, either so that they can make an informed decision in their life about something that matters to them, like, you know, their child's schooling or a health decision they've got to make, or just because they're looking for something that's interesting, or they want to better understand an issue and they're looking for content they can trust. So something, you know, about the economy or something like that. So the other thing that's important and quite different to what we do compared to other media is that the academics that we publish get final sign-off on all of the edits that are made by us journalists in the newsroom. You know, when I worked at the Sydney Morning Herald, for example, that wasn't the case even for the on-staff journos. Like, you would file your story and then you'd open the paper the next day and often it would look quite different. And certainly they didn't grant that amount of control to non-staff contributors like, you know, academics or opinion writers and so on. So at The Conversation, we do take that part quite seriously, because it just means that the academics are publishing something that is evidence-based and true to, it doesn't mischaracterize their findings or their opinion, it doesn't quote them out of context and that sort of thing, because a lot of academics have had not great experiences with journalists in those regards. So the whole point is to really sort of seed the media and really proliferate evidence-based analysis. So it's not really, we sort of try and not use the word opinion pieces. They're not really just opinion because everybody's got one. It's more like, and I mean, sometimes it does venture close to that terrain, but it's meant to be informed analysis. So the idea is academics come to us, they pitch a story idea, or we might contact them. So, for example, you know, we sort of have a feel, like everybody does, of what sorts of things are growing in interest. We also keep a pretty close eye on and have a pretty active relationship with Google to find out what people are Googling. So, you know, for example, there has been a 450% surge in searches for homeschooling in this last week. So, you know, we're running around trying to find content on that, because clearly that's what readers want, right? Like, we're trying to sort of read the tea leaves and find out what people want about these sorts of things. So some way or another, one of the journalists in our newsroom finds an academic, or they find us, we connect and we sort of have a conversation about a story idea. They say, yes, I'd like to write that. Or we say, yes, we'd love to publish your piece. They go away and write their piece. We then pick up their draft and edit it and make it look sparkling and beautiful, because academics sometimes are brilliant communicators and we really don't need to change very much at all. But often what needs to be changed is a rewrite of the structure to get the most newsworthy information right up the top, because we know that readers often don't read to the end of the article. So we're really trying to get the most important information right up the top. We might be trying to find a headline that we think readers will click on, and we do quite a lot of internal, you know, tapping the wisdom of the crowd of our newsroom. Like, we have a whole Slack channel that's just about headlines, where people are throwing back and forth ideas about, you know, I've got a story about, you know, coronavirus in the property market. Like, what about this? What about this? What about this? So we workshop the headlines internally quite a lot. So we do our sort of work on it, edit it up, send it back to the academic. They either approve it or change it as needed if errors have been introduced in the editing process. And then once it's approved, we publish the article and then try and get it republished by other media. So it's meant to be a bit of a collaboration between journalists and editors in our newsroom and the academics in the universities. So we don't pay the academics. So why do they do it? What's the point? Well, part of it is because increasingly academics are expected to do some sort of public outreach and public engagement. And we know that The Conversation is really an easy way to do that. It's kind of what we do. It's the only thing we do, really. So after writing an article, we know that about 66% of the academics get contacted by other media, by some, producer on a TV show or a radio show saying, hey, I saw your piece on The Conversation, can you come on my program? Or they might get contact from industry for consultation work, or they might even be invited to speak at conferences, or be invited to submit to or review for high-ranking journals. So I guess the argument that we make is that the conversation is not the end game. It's sort of one of the tools that you can use to try and achieve some of these other goals, to inform the public, grow your network, and hopefully make a difference. We know that policymakers read The Conversation. We have an astonishing number of people subscribe to our daily newsletter whose email addresses end in .gov.au. So we know that for academics who are trying to influence policy and get, evidence into policy, then this is a way to try and chip away at that. We also make sure the academics get metrics showing, how many readers they got, how their readership has changed over time, where their readers are located, and what the numbers are on their article, what the social media engagement is like. And that can be quite useful, I think, for academics who are asked to sort of demonstrate impact, to be able to provide those numbers. Just going back to what I said about audience, and, this is the message that I kind of bang on about endlessly whenever you're thinking about any sort of public engagement. Just think about your audience, because honestly, that is the most important thing. So, if you're doing an interview or you're writing a piece for the Financial Review, you can use certain vocabulary and get away with it. Like, you can talk about the yield curve, the Reserve Bank's attempt to, influence the yield curve. But like, if you're writing for a much more general audience, if you're writing for the Daily Telegraph, you might not use that language necessarily in a more general audience. So constantly what we're trying to say to academics is, think about my reader. My reader is probably, the biggest demographic chunk of our readers is the kind of my age, like it's like between, I think, 30 and 45. So they're sort of a younger person. They've usually got an undergraduate degree or above, but they're not an expert in your field, so they may not understand your jargon and terminology and acronyms. Importantly, I always say to academics that imagine that your reader is on their phone and they're reading this article, scrolling quite quickly on their phone while notifications pop up all over their phone. They're probably on public transport, although not lately. But in general, they would be on public transport in a noisy environment, trying to keep an ear out for when their stop is. They're probably thinking about what to cook for dinner. So they don't have their best attention span on. So you need to write for that person. And that's not ideal, but that's just what it is. So what does that mean in practice? In practice, that means short sentences. A short sentence is a really good sentence, and constantly I'm shortening sentences because it's really powerful. It means that even if you're sort of reading while you're being jostled around, you can just read something and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, I've kind of got that chunk of information, even if you don't finish the article. It means watch out for acronyms. Even if you've explained an acronym up the top of an article, like, your reader's probably forgotten what that stands for by the end of the article, unless it's a really, really familiar one. And, even simple stuff like looking out for the formatting, like a really big chunk of text that's without any breaks, I would be looking to break that up with a picture or break it up with just some spacing so that the reader isn't confronted with like a big chunk of text and kind of goes, oh, that looks too hard, I'm going to click away onto Instagram or something. So writing for that reader rather than your idealized reader who's, reading something with their full concentration. And, we sort of also say that you can try and use these skills of clear, concise communication when you're doing your grant applications as well. It's a different language and a different style of writing, but the same principles apply of, having to grab somebody's attention, make them care. They have to understand, why do I care about this topic? If you can't make somebody care about a topic, then why are they going to read it? They're really not going to read. So even if you think it's really obvious to you why your issue that you're researching matters, it might not necessarily be obvious to your reader, and sometimes you just really need to spell out why this issue matters.
Can you give us an example of that? Like, how do you go from can you think of an example of somebody didn't make the audience care, but then you help them kind of reframe that?
Spell it out. Yeah, sure. So, okay. Well, one example I often use is about childcare. You know, I had a piece by an economist writing about childcare policy reform, and you know, the fundamental question there for me as an editor was, if I don't have a kid in daycare, why would I care about childcare policy? Like, it just doesn't affect me. I never think about it. But in fact, effective childcare policy is a really important plank of economic policy, because if you don't get it right, then women do not return to the workforce, and it stuffs up your workforce participation. You know, your GDP is affected, you lose expertise, and you know, it's a waste of valuable educational investment. Like, it's actually a massive economic issue. Even if you're like 19 years old and you don't have kids in childcare, then it still matters a lot to you. It matters to the job market. It matters to heaps of things. So he thinks that's obvious because he's an economist and he's been thinking about that for years, but it's actually not obvious to our readers, and we need to spell it out. Another example, I was just editing a piece now on by some, you know, nutrition researchers about alternatives to fresh vegetables, you know, fermented vegetables and frozen vegetables. You know, what does the research say about the nutritional value of these alternatives to fresh vegetables? And it just needed a part at the top that said in plain English, hey, a coronavirus pandemic is on and you may not be able to get all of the fresh vegetables that you normally would get. And I know that seems super obvious and like front of mind for everybody, but you just need to remind the reader, like, hey, I'm talking to you right now. Like, this matters to you. Like, click on this, like, read it now. It actually matters to you. So yeah, just don't assume that your reader is thinking, oh, this matters to me. Like, you really need to say almost those exact words. Like, you know, you might be wondering blah, 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 or maybe this has happened to you or something like that. So stuff like that. Yeah, and so when I'm talking to academics and I'm sort of saying, these are the triggers, like if something happens to you, like if you have new research, contact the conversation, or even, you know, the broader media in general. The media just loves new research findings. Or if there's a news hook, something happens in the news and you think, I have a contribution to make to this debate. I can, you know, give some perspective on what's happening or talk about something that hasn't been discussed very well so far, and those sorts of things. That's a good time to contact the conversation. If you've got a fresh take on an old issue, if there's something that you think, you know, everybody says X, but really it's Y, that is a really good piece to do. Or even just a listicle, you know, 5 things you need to know about washing your hands, or like, you know, 6 myths about vaccination and why they're wrong. Those pieces often go very well. And we often find that it's a really easy way for the writer, the author, the academic to just order their thoughts. Because often they've got so much knowledge in their head, they're just like, oh my God, how do I distill this down into an 800-word article? I'm just like, okay, just tell me the 5 most important things that you would like my reader to know, and assume that they'll probably only read the first 3. So put them up the top, yeah. We also just sort of always constantly say that you should write the way that you talk. You know, a human male disembarked from a vehicle. No, a man got out of a car. That's the kind of language that we're looking for. Watch out for passive sentence structure. So we see every single day I'm converting passive sentences to active sentence. So the passive sentence is, you know, it is expected that fresh vegetables will grow increasingly scarce. I mean, that's an okay sentence, but a better sentence is, you know, like the government expects fresh vegetables to grow increasingly scarce, or like supermarkets have warned consumers that, like, put the agent first, the person or the organization or the doer up the front. And we say right at the level that a really smart 16-year-old could understand. So imagine a really smart year 11 student. Can you write for that person's reading age? If you can, you're doing great. And I just sort of always say that when you pitch an idea to and like, I really encourage you guys, you guys are all master's students, right? Yeah. So you can't write for the conversation because we only go PhD and above. But if you do end up doing a PhD, I really encourage you to pitch the conversation. But you can pitch to any media. And if you want to develop yourself as, you know, somebody who knows something and has something to say about a certain topic, like you should consider pitching to the ABC Analysis and Op-Ed page. You know, their email address is on the ABC Analysis page. You should consider pitching to the Sydney Morning Herald Op-Ed page, or, you know, your local paper, or contacting community radio or other radio stations, and really developing that skill as somebody who's a good communicator. So when you're doing your pitch, just remember that editors are crazy, insanely busy. Like, in the short time that I've been with you, I've missed 4 calls and I've got 7 notifications on my phone. So that's just the world that journalists live in. So when I look at a pitch, I honestly have 30 seconds to make a decision, if that. Like, I just read it and go, yes or no. And that might sound really unfair and horrible, but I wish I didn't have 4 missed calls and like 5 notifications on my phone, but that's just the world that journalists live in now. And there's also fewer journalists than ever because Google destroyed our industry, and so did Facebook. Thanks, guys. So, you know, we're all working under incredible time pressure. So in the slide deck I've got some examples of a not very good pitch, and also an example of
should I share those? Why don't I share those with you?
I wonder if I can do this. Share. Okay, does this work? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Okay, instead of this, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So here is the not very good pitch. Oh, it goes on and on and on and on. It's actually quite interesting ideas. Like, they're talking about politics and capitalism and socialism. Like, I'm interested in those ideas, but this person is making me work so incredibly hard to understand what it is they are trying, that I just don't have time. I don't have time to go back to this person and say, oh no, tell me in more detail, what do you mean? I just have to say, sorry, no thank you, thanks for pitching. So this is a much better pitch. Can you see that, about sharks?
No, not yet.
Oh.
There we go.
Yeah. April 30 marks the end of WA's controversial baited drumline program. Now, this April 30 bit is what we call a news hook. If you've got a news hook, like something's happening in the news, or there's a date coming up that relates to your thing, or something's about to be announced or has recently been announced, if you've got a news hook that you can peg your idea to, instantly editors are much more interested than if there's no news hook. So often what I hear editors in our newsroom say is, why do I need, like, what's your idea and why do I need to know about it now? Like, why does my reader need to know about this right now? So, you know, try and find a news hook. That's good. You don't have to have a news hook. It's not crucial, but if you've got one, it helps. They've got some new data. Great. That's very good. They've got a finding that is maybe contrary to what some people would believe. They find that most ocean users oppose killing sharks. And I mean, by the way, I think ocean users is jargon, like they mean surfers and swimmers, like fish are ocean users. So that's not the kind of words that we would use. And they say they've got a paper coming out in a journal. Great, that's really good. And they do say we've got a draft ready to go. I actually advise against preparing a draft before you get the green light from an editor, because you could have just wasted your time. You know, we may already have about 3 pieces in train about shark hazard and baited drumline programs and stuff. So it's better if you can just write, what's this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4-sentence pitch, or 4-paragraph pitch. And that way, if it's a yes, great. If it's a no, well, what if you wasted 4 sentences? It's not too bad. So that's the sort of idea there. Yes.
Is the final sentence there, I'm an academic or research with relevant expertise, is that sort of a bit like too vague? Is it better to be a little bit more specific?
Yeah, the reason that's there is because the way our pitch page was set up was we had to have this as a box that people checked, because people kept pitching who were not academics, and we had to keep kind of saying, sorry, this is only for academics. So in your pitch, certainly I think it doesn't hurt to explain your credentials a little bit and your authority to speak on a certain topic. So, you know, some people really are like the perfect person to speak on a certain topic. Yesterday, you know, I was searching everywhere for infectious disease specialists who could talk about schools staying open. And there are a lot of infectious disease specialists out there, but I really wanted people who could speak with some authority on that. And then, you know, you find people, and it turns out there's an area of infectious disease research that's pediatric infectious disease research. I was like, oh my God, these are the perfect people. So like, if you really are right in the exact correct discipline to be talking with real authority on a certain topic, by all means mention that, because that's important information, and may not be something that the editor will find out on their own. They may not have time to Google your name, and certainly they're not going to read your research gate or anything like that. So yeah, spell it out. But yeah, that's why that's written in that sort of quite formal language.
Can you show us the slide, 2 slides before, Sunny, that is the snapshot of your inbox?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is just the pitch page. It just goes on and on. Like, we get hundreds of these pitches every day. So, oh, that's the other thing to say. If you get rejected, please don't take it personally. Please don't think, oh, I must have had a terrible idea. Quite often we have to reject very good ideas because we just don't have capacity, and we just, you know, especially in a time like now, you know, when there's just insane amount of news going around. So try again. You might need to rethink your angle. You might need to think, I wonder if there's a different way. You know, I've pitched this to the health page, but I wonder if with a few tweaks I could make this a science story, or I wonder if with a slightly different look on it we could make this a business story, or you know, so think about, you know, finding different ways, or pitching in a few months' time or in a few weeks' time when, you know, people will be looking for non-coronavirus stories pretty soon. So yeah, don't take rejection personally. I'll just go straight to the last slide, which is sort of some do's and don'ts. You know, do find ways to make your idea sound new and not just telling me something that I already know, because we do get some of that stuff and you have to kind of think, well, why do I care about this? Why do I need to know this now? Make sure you do a keyword search to find out what has already been published by this particular publication, in this case, the conversation on this topic, before I pitch, because if you're pitching something that we've already published on, then it's not going to get up. You know, do become a consumer of the media. It doesn't mean you have to become an absolute news junkie, but if you're just keeping an eye on what the media is saying about your particular topic, you can do a Google News alert for your particular topic and find out what's being reported. Then you can get a sense of, you know, where the debate is at for your topic. And remember to ask yourself that so what question. Why does anyone care? You know, why does this issue matter? And make yourself contactable, you know, particularly when there is a really big breaking news story like now. The people who list their mobile numbers are the ones who are going to get quoted. And, you know, you sometimes get academics saying, oh, you know, how come this person's always in the news and, you know, they're everywhere. It's like, well, it's because they hand their mobile number around and journalists are on deadline and we just need somebody like who can pick up the phone right now. So, yeah, leave your mobile on and act fast. That just means the news cycle moves incredibly quickly, and the things that we're talking about today will sort of not be in the news next week. There might be a slightly different angle. Like, you know, our top story last week was about what will happen to property prices from coronavirus. And now that would almost be sort of like a kind of a gauche kind of question to ask, because now, you know, things are getting to a point where there's like, you know, the health risk is developing so profoundly, like that's a real last week story now. So say you are a property expert and you waited till this week to write that story, it would almost be too late. Not too late, but it's also like the moment really was last week. And okay, don't argue against yourself and downplay your expertise. This is a real problem in academia. There is a lot of imposter syndrome. I've never been an academic, but I've sort of hung around with academics for 8 years, and what I observe from the outside is it is a very hierarchical industry, and I understand that, and you know, you do you, but as journalists, we really don't care about that at all. And if you come to me and you're an ECR or a PhD and you've got a good story to tell and you can articulate your ideas and it relates to your area of expertise, then you got the job. Like, I just don't care if you're not, you know, the top expert in Australia on that issue. And don't pitch when it's too late. Please stick to the word count. If we agree on 800 words, please file 800 words. Don't file 3,000 words. And please don't go missing in action after you've filed your story, because then we can't get the story up, and it's a real shame.
Sunny, do you have like stats for average word count of a conversation piece?
Well, we aim for 800 words. probably, I don't have stats, but probably if we're being truthful, it's probably closer to 900 words. But, you know, every so often my boss sends around a all staff email saying, I'm noticing word length blowing out. And it, like, you might think that that's a real sort of weirdly fascist decision, but it actually does impact the republication rate. So other media, I mean, I was talking to a newspaper editor once who laughed when I said 800 words. They said, we'll never publish 800 words. It's too long. We don't have space. You know, it's maybe slightly different online, but certainly in the print media, they're looking for more like 600 words. So we're aiming for 800. If you can say it in less, that's better. And if you really, really must go to 900 or 1,000 words, we'll let you get away with it some of the time, but probably not all the time. Any other questions? Sorry I talked so long.
Yeah, should we throw it open for questions? We haven't had anything come in on the chat yet. So if anyone wants to, I'm going to switch to gallery mode so I can see everyone. If anyone wants to just sort of chime in, you're welcome to. Otherwise, you can relay any questions you have for Sunny via the chat function.
Yeah. Is anybody thinking of doing a PhD? No. Oh, look, somebody is. What's your PhD about, Samir?
Well, I was having a discussion with my supervisor yesterday. I'm currently doing forestry right now, but eventually I want to look at international education, the history of it. So transition, there's two different disciplines, but that's definitely on the agenda.
Cool.
Looking into that idea of international mobility, and forestry is an example, but like looking at it more from higher education perspective, like student exchange programs, etc.
Right.
There's quite a few people on the chat saying yes as well. I think we've got quite a lot of people doing the MRes.
I mean, just on international education, I mean, like there are 1,000 angles on that, you know, it's a huge topic, massively important to our economy, massively important to the global economy. Like, who knows what's going to happen with coronavirus to the international education market, and just all those like personal losses of exchange programs that have had to be cancelled, or people who are trapped in a country and can't get home. I mean, yeah, there's no end of angles on that for sure. What about anybody else want to talk about what they research or what they're thinking of researching? Anybody? No? What about you, Angelica? Who's Angelica?
Hey, I'd put my video on, but I have a lot going on behind me right now.
Oh, that's okay. Child's drawings behind me.
Yes, actually, it's funny enough, I was actually going to put my mic on to speak. For myself, right now in my MRes, I'm looking at experiences with like social services for children who've been impacted by family violence. So I'm hoping, like, if I get to do a PhD, I get to explore that a bit more and actually focus on children there specifically, and children from different backgrounds. Because I feel like we haven't done a lot of that in Australia. So,
I mean, that's a topic that, like, you know, is never not important. It's always important, but it is also a topic that kind of goes in and out of the news cycle. So, you know, when the family court review is happening, you know, that's going to be back in the news. Or if Pauline Hanson says something about, you know, children and family violence, like that'll be back in the news. Or if there's some horrible case that blows up, it comes back in the news. So I think in that particular topic, you know, there's always, and what we often do with this is, you know, yes, this case is in the news and it's really tragic, but here's an area of this question that, you know, is often left unexplored, and then you can go and develop your angle of whatever it is. So sometimes addressing that news hook is really just as simple as saying, you might have heard about this that's happening in the news, but let's not forget about that, and then you can just go and talk about your thing, whatever it is. So yeah, sounds like a great topic.
Actually, you brought up Pauline Hanson, and that's probably what my question is going to be based on. When it comes to the conversation and giving opinions, I guess, based off what has come out from government and what politicians have said, is there a specific way that you as editors like academics to go about it? Because I know it can sometimes be tricky navigating what you say about the government, but yeah, is there any protocol?
What do you say about the government? So look, you know, Scott Morrison is a dickhead is not a story. You know, Scott Morrison's approach on the school closures issue is ill-informed. Here are the reasons why. That's a great story. Like, I'd be interested to read that. Or Scott Morrison's approach to the school closures is exactly what the evidence says we should do. Here's why. So you can definitely critique and heavily critique policy or government figures, or describe people as divisive, or have poor leadership, or whatever you want to say, whatever horrible thing you want to say about somebody. That's fine, as long as you've got a really well substantiated argument. So if Pauline Hanson, like, for example, I know Pauline Hanson goes around saying something like 22 fathers a week are committing suicide due to the family separation issue, and like, that's just not true. Like, that stat is not correct. So we've done a piece saying this stat's not correct, like fact checking her saying that. So yeah, if you hear people saying things and you think that is not what the research evidence says, we'd love to hear about it.
Okay, great, awesome, thank you.
Okay, somebody has a question here. Mark, how stringent is the fact checking process? Or, as these articles come from academics, is it assumed they're always correct? No, it is not assumed that they're always correct. I mean, it depends. Who's on this call? Let's just check. Okay, good, all right. Oh, there's a whole other page of people over here.
Yeah, there's like 38, 37 of us. It's me and Jack and MRes students. Well, okay. What are you going to say?
All right, so mostly, okay, here's what I was going to say.
Oh, and I should say that I think these guys know us pretty well.
Here's what I'm going to say. It's not very controversial, but here's what I was going to say. Was my personal experience is often the more early career people are more likely to double check their work than the more senior people. And I think that's the same for journalists too. I don't think that that's just academics. I think people, as they go through their career, get sort of comfortable and start to think that they don't need to double check things, but you bloody well do need to double check things. And if an error is made, we will publicly correct it. And it will be very embarrassing for you and for the conversation and for me personally as an editor. So, sometimes we've published things that have had errors in them and the academic has said, oh, can we just quietly fix that? It's like, no, sorry, we're going to have to issue a whole series of social media posts retracting this article and saying sorry, and it's going to be really painful. So yeah, it is important. The first thing is, we would hope that academics and our authors all check what they want, right? And add links. If you're saying that, 28% of Australians are obese or something, you need to link to the source for that figure. Or if you're, saying that the government has, the Department of Health has done X, Y, Z, like, you need to be really sure that they actually did do that. And sometimes we will do some of the heavy lifting by submitting questions to people to give a right of reply, particularly in articles where we think there's a bad guy, this article's about how the Department of Health has failed to do X, Y, Z, or this article's about how, this company did blah, 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 and it's not good enough. We often would submit questions to the bad guy, whether it's the government or whatever, just to double check that they did actually say that, or they did actually do that, or they did actually fail to do that. Because often what you find is that, particularly the government has failed to do this. What often has happened is the government did do that, but the academic just didn't notice it because it went out on a press release, or it wasn't covered very well by the media. So you do have to be very careful about claims that you make about what other organisations or people have done, because it may not.
Do you have like a chief fact checker, or like do things have to go to a legal team very often, or is it sort of like you as the journalist?
So our lawyers, our defamation lawyers, are funnily enough the same lawyers that acted for Rebel Wilson, which in the case that has gone down in Australian defamation law history as the most lucrative amount of money that somebody's won in a defamation case. So we do sometimes send things to lawyers, but we use our editorial. We don't want to burden these lawyers who act pro bono for us with checking every single thing. So we only send it to them if there's a bad guy in the article and we think there's something legally risky. If it's about a court case that is currently on, we have to be super careful not to be in contempt of court or sub judice. You have to be careful about criticising court decisions. Josh Frydenberg got in trouble at one stage for rubbishing a judge in a court decision. So, you know, we all have a pretty good understanding of defamation law, so you don't need to worry about that. Your editor will work with you on that. But in terms of fact checking, I have learned through bitter experience that it is worth checking everything in an article that comes across my desk. You know, if somebody's saying the sky is blue, you've got to check, you've got to look out the window and double check it, because it might not be that day. Or if they've, you know, people put the decimal point in the wrong place. They say millions when really they mean billions, or vice versa. Like, people make mistakes all the time. We're all working under time pressure. It's very normal. So we check things, and we definitely do not assume that it's always correct. Okay.
Yeah, question from Julie.
Julie, can you talk about the use of specialised jargon and how you deal with that? Do the editors do that, or the author? Okay, so we would say, in the first instance, we would hope that you look carefully and critically over your work before you file, and just ask yourself, like, would my neighbour understand this article? You know, would my mum understand this article? Would somebody who's a friend of mine but working in a totally different field understand this article? And, you know, you would need to, if you think you've used phrases in there that you think the average person might not necessarily understand what it is, you can still use them. You might just need to put brackets around an explanation afterwards. So, you know, I don't know, the other day I was editing a piece about the Reserve Bank rate cut, and it kept talking about the lower bound. And I was like, what the hell is the lower bound? So I Googled it, and apparently the lower bound is the point at which the bank thinks cutting any further will make no difference. So the cash rate's at like 0.25 or something, or the cash rate's at, it was cut by 0.25 the other day. And they're saying that basically if we cut it any further, it's going to make no difference. But you just need to explain that, like the lower bound, brackets, the point at which the bank thinks any further cuts will make no difference. So you can use very specialised jargon that is important in your field, but just explain what it is. And if we notice in your draft that you haven't done that, we will edit it and make those changes for you, because we're looking at it with fresh eyes. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Anything else?
I have a question.
Okay.
A lot of us are probably wondering, when we might have a good idea for the content of a story, but how do we begin a story? My question specifically is about how useful do you think either a bad guy or like a personal anecdote?
Oh yeah, okay.
Two devices for opening.
Yeah. So you can have a bad guy if you want, but you just need to be bloody sure that the bad guy really is bad and that you've checked all the facts on that. Or if you think that there is something that needs to be checked, signal that to your editor. You can start with a personal anecdote. It's not a bad idea. It's a lovely piece written by a Western Sydney academic called, what's his name? I want to say Mark Antonio, but I think that's the name of.
Yeah, that's
right. Mark Antonio. Yeah.
Yeah, that is name, right? I didn't make that up. He wrote a lovely piece about children who are toddlers and learning how to speak and having developmental speech delays, and they're raised in a bilingual home. And he talks about his own son's experience. You know, he's like, hey, my kid's raised we speak English, we speak Greek. My kid had these speech developmental delays. I was worried about it, but here's what the research actually says on that. And he moves quite swiftly from personal anecdote to here's what the evidence says. And that's kind of the secret sauce. So you can talk about your personal stuff a little bit, and it's actually quite lovely and a nice way in, but I wouldn't linger much beyond 2 or 3 paths on that, because very swiftly we need to get back to the kind of comfort zone of what readers come to the conversation for, which is, what does the evidence say on this topic?
Can you explain that piece of jargon you just used?
What did I say?
Paths.
Oh, paragraphs, paths, yeah. I used to work at Reuters, the news wire, where time is of the essence, and they teach you a method of writing stories. And if you look closely, all Reuters stories are written this way. I haven't worked for them for over 10 years, but I still sometimes have dreams that I have to write a Reuters story, and I can still like, so this is actually quite a useful way to think about it. So the first paragraph is stating the basic facts that the reader needs to know about what's happened. So what happened, how do you know this? Where did it happen and when? So, you know, tariffs on palm oil imports will be lifted this week, the Agriculture Minister said in Jakarta today. So it's like, what happened? Who said it? How do you know this? And where did it happen and when did it happen? So if you look closely on the Conversation website, a lot of the stories start with that. You know, the coronavirus, you know, pandemic is likely to disrupt Australian lives for 6 months, the Prime Minister said in Canberra today. You know, what does this mean? Oh, why 6 months? Okay, let's look at what the evidence says about why this 6 month figure is so important when you're talking about pandemics and disruptions. So the crucial information goes first. That's the first part. This is the Reuters method. First part, who said what, when, and where, and why, and how. The second part is what we call the cosmic part. The cosmic part is like this cosmically, you know, a well-rounded paragraph that places the preceding information into the broader context. You know, the lift on palm oil tariffs comes as Indonesia is, you know, suffering a shortage. Not that Indonesia would ever suffer a shortage of palm oil, but let's just pretend they would. And they need this for manufacturing immediately. Like, so that kind of puts the preceding information into some context. Like, it comes as this is happening, or, you know, the 6 month figure, you know, that the Prime Minister said in Canberra today comes as, you know, the nation grapples with, you know, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people working from home, schools facing disruption, events cancelled, blah, 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 just to put it into awesome broader context. In the Reuters message, the third paragraph is the golden quote. It's like the best quote you've got from all of your interviews. But for you guys writing an analysis piece, I would often, instead of looking for a golden quote, like, you know, the Prime Minister saying, you know, I would send my kids to school today. Like, that's a golden quote where he's really explaining, you know, why for him it's important that we don't shut schools. Like, he believes in this so much that he's even sending his kids to school. So that's a golden quote on the schools issue. But, you know, for you guys for analysis, we would say that the third quote is the third paragraph is kind of signposting, like, here's what you need to know about it. It's like, here's what's going to come up in this article. And then from there, you can just make your main points, use subheadings to create some structure in your article, and use evidence to back up your arguments. Use examples to back up your arguments. You know, it's all well and good to say, you know, we should be doing such and such. But if you can use examples like, oh, Singapore didn't close their schools, or like Hong Kong has announced school closures today, like, these examples bring your ideas to life and make people go, oh, I kind of get it now.
Yeah, Sunny, you led into what I was going to ask, which was actually about like the subheadings and the paragraph structure and stuff. So it's really good to have that model for an opening, and because we're obviously getting the guys to write their own public audience essay, conversation style piece by the end of the unit. So all of these tips are really, really handy. When it comes to subheadings, they can obviously they can work really well for the story. Like, are there any sort of tips on subheadings, or like, is it the kind of thing where you guys as editors are usually changing them? We're usually adding them? Like,
yeah, we're usually changing them and adding them. And you can use subheadings to tell a story. If you look at Peter Martin, our economic editor, if you look at a lot of the stories that he edits or he writes, he often uses subheadings to tell a little bit of a story, like in isolation. I'll just try and get one of his stories up. He did one the other day that does this. And just find an example. So he did one the other day about the 3 things that, more than a rate cut, behind the Reserve Bank's 3-point plan. And his 3 subheadings are like, basically the 3-point plan. You know, rates will be at rock bottom for the duration. 2, it's about providing cheap money for banks. And 3, it's about forcing money into investors' hands through bonds. So yeah, it's kind of using the subheadings to get the most important information across, because sometimes your reader will be so time pressed that they'll just read the subheadings. And sometimes, you know, we use subheadings to make it a bit more playful, or to put a pun in there, you know, to try and just liven it up a bit, to kind of draw the reader through the article to the end. That's important as well. But yeah, personally, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because your editor will work on those sorts of things.
And then closing paragraph? Like the ending of it? Like assuming people get there, what are you hoping to do as editors?
Sometimes editors talk about the kicker. The kicker is like the final paragraph that's like, wow, that's really punchy. Like that's left me with something to think about. I'm going to go home and talk to my partner about this article today. And that's good. Other times we would just want a paragraph that ends summing it all up. So, you know, this article I've just edited about how to, you know, make sure you're eating enough vegetables at a time when we can't all be going to the shops all the time to stock up on fresh vegetables. It just says basically at the end, look, even when there's a pandemic on, you should be eating your vegetables. It's important. We know it's important. Australians don't eat enough vegetables, and just get some frozen vegetables into you and just like stop whinging about it. So, you know, it's just kind of like it sums it all up. So yeah, you can kind of have a concluding sentence, paragraph that brings it all together as well. But I would also say if you are working with an editor, then often what matters the most is just that you get it done. Because something that is imperfect but that you can file it and then an editor, it's often quicker for us to use our skills to beautify it. But what we can't do is get the basic arguments on the page because we don't know what the basic arguments are. And, you know, you guys are the ones who provide that and provide lots of links and things, and then we can kind of end up doing the beautifying. Hang on, somebody said the inverted news pyramid. Yeah, the inverted journalism pyramid. Do people know what that means?
Yeah, do you want to explain it?
Sure. Let me see if I've got a slide on that. I think I do, actually. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see something that says Pitching and Writing Masterclass? No? Is that working?
Not yet.
That's odd. Yeah. Okay, well, the inverted news pyramid is just where we say, you know, in a traditional academic article, you might have some historical information first. You might have some, you know, background information, what's already known on the topic. A lot of kind of background stuff goes first, and then the most important stuff kind of comes towards the end or sort of towards the middle. And in news writing, we try to reverse that and get the most important information right up the top.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we've got your screen now, so if you've got it on.
See, but my poor little NBN connection.
I think I've got a picture of the inverted pyramid here just from Google. Do you want me to just flip that up so people can see?
Yeah, sure, you can do that. Or people can Google it themselves. But yeah, long story short, my internet cannot cope with me doing a Zoom chat and doing this at the same time. But yeah, long story short, most important information goes at the top, less important information goes down the bottom. Certainly in the olden days of newspapers, the printers used to just literally cut the articles from the bottom because they couldn't fit it on the page. So that's the idea, is like, assume that the least important information goes right down the bottom. Yeah, that's it. Now, somebody else had a question, but the questions have sort of disappeared. I don't know where they went. Anyway, doesn't matter. Maybe
stop sharing, Jack.
Okay, let's just say. Oh yeah, sometimes there's no subheadings. Yeah. Personally, I think subheadings are important to introduce structure and to give the reader a little break because, you know, I remember having coffee with somebody from BuzzFeed once and I asked them, what do you think of our layout on our page? And he said, I noticed that it is really big blocks of text, and it's certainly at BuzzFeed we try to break it up just so that the eye is not confronted with a really impenetrable block of text. And I think that's actually quite true, and probably part of the secret of BuzzFeed's success is that they think quite carefully about the user experience. You know, is this a fun experience for the reader to read this article? Because if it's not, they're going to click away, and it's never been easier for readers to click away. So subheadings just give the eye a little break, and it's like taking a breath. You know, it's like in a sheet of music when you just have the little breath symbol and you're like, okay, I can start the next bar now. So yeah, I think subheadings are important about that. We've talked about the last paragraph. What does it say? Challenge the reader's thinking. Oh yeah, you could do that. We're doing research on the topic in the long term, waiting. Yes. Possibly. This person asks, if we are doing research on a topic that is going to be relevant to policy in the long term, do you recommend waiting to pitch it until the other topics like COVID-19 that are really dominating the media become less relevant? Yes, I do. We talk quite a lot about stories getting lost in the wash. Like, you know, I've got a massive suite of stories on my dashboard right now for a big package that we were planning to release right now about the anniversary of Captain Cook arriving in Botany Bay. I'd be mad to release that now. Like, it would just, no one would read it. It'd be a complete waste of so many people's time and work. So we're holding that until things die down a little bit with COVID-19. I mean, yes, it will take time, but, you know, I can already see on Twitter opinion editors for The Guardian, The Herald, and other places, The Australian, saying, you know, pitch me non-COVID-19 stories because we're going to start looking for those in the next few weeks. So yeah, the time is coming for that. And yes, you absolutely should wait until a massive topic like this is just died down a little bit. Okay. All right, somebody mentions about this article on philosophy in the Italian coronavirus lockdown, on how to think positively about isolation. Okay. Right. Okay. So this person asks, you know, when I went and read the article, I found that it was more sort of about a relationship with the planet and climate change. And, you know, could that title potentially attract readers that might not think they're interested in the issues of climate change? Well, yes, I guess that is possible. But also, it is our duty to try and pick a headline that we think will get the most number of readers as possible without being inaccurate or saying something that the author is like, I didn't say that, or I don't feel that. So it's up to the author in this case to make the reader care about the issue of climate change. And it sounds like maybe in this case it wasn't super successful, but certainly they should try. So yeah, you know, sometimes articles do look like they're about one thing, and then when you read it, you realize, oh, it's kind of about something else. And I feel okay about that. I don't know. What do you think? Sometimes I think it's got to be, you know, we talk a lot about the headline. It has to do what it says on the box. Like, you know, people need to read the article and go, oh yes, this headline, I know what it's going to be about, and I'm going to read it. But you know,
we actually have a word for this. Yeah, do you want to explain, Alex?
Yeah, so Jack and I, as you may know by now, Sunny, are prolific neologizers. We invent words for things all the time.
Yeah.
And our word for what you're describing is tinsome.
Yeah.
As in it does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go do what it says on the tin.
A title does that. Subheadings should do that. That's how I kind of think about subheadings too.
Yeah.
Is that they signal structure in the sense of, yeah, there it is, tinsome. They signal structure in the sense of telling you what the next little bit of the structure of the essay.
Yeah, signposting. Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that's important to remember is that increasingly, and this is not just for us, but for all media, the role of Google native search. So the way that people find articles these days is because they Googled something. You know, they Googled how to homeschool my child, or like what will property prices do with, how will coronavirus affect property prices? So there are certain words, you know, search engine optimization, I'm sure you know that term, SEO. There are certain keywords you need to get into the headline, otherwise it won't turn up in somebody's Google search. So you need to sometimes imagine, who do I want to target? Who's my target reader? And what would that person be Googling in order to find my article, and get as many of those terms into the headline as you can. Does that make sense? Google Keyword Planner is a useful tool. That's right. It is a useful tool. Very true.
Sunny, can you talk a little bit about, I guess it's two separate topics, so you could either pick one or go for both if you like. One of them is republication, and where articles in the conversation
get republished
and can end up. And the other one is, I suppose, a little bit related, but where, like, examples of where people's careers have gone because people have read a conversation article, and the author of the article then has been kind of approached to do things, or
yeah. Okay. So I have so many examples of this, and I will try and find some now. So let's say, just on the republication thing, we have a really close relationship with the ABC. The editor of the op-ed and analysis page there is called Lee Tompkin. I used to work with her at the Herald. She's really nice. Anyway, every morning we brief her on what we've got coming up, and she sort of looks at the menu and says, oh, I'll take that, I don't want that. So we have a very close republication relationship with them. SBS, Fairfax, well now 9, news.com.au, Canberra Times are all republishing content. The ABC radio, like RN, and also the local ABC radios, pick up heaps of stuff and basically get the authors on as talent on the shows, on the programs. And, you know, increasingly the project as well, like commercial TV, is picking up authors that they've read pieces on the conversation, and then they're then trying to get that talent onto the site. So in terms of where people's careers have gone and stuff, I mean, I just got a message earlier from somebody saying, what did they say? My colleague, who is one of the health editors, said, I just heard some good news about, hang on. One of the authors who's written a coronavirus piece for us being, you know, contacted by the Department of Health and being consulted there to try and, you know, inform the policy on these issues. So that's a pretty common one. We often hear about government departments contacting authors and saying, can you help us with policy development? You know, being put on advisory boards, Senate, you know, giving advice to Senate inquiries, being called by ministerial staffers to help inform speeches by ministers. That's a pretty common one. And, you know, also international organisations like the WHO, the UN uses conversation articles. They republish them. They contact the authors and say, can you have a chat to us about this? Somebody wrote a piece about Uber's pricing policy and then got a call from Uber. This is a Macquarie University guy. Got a call from Uber saying, we'd like to fly you over to talk to us about our pricing our pricing policy. So, you know, it's pretty common. It doesn't happen every single time. And, you know, sometimes you just can't read the tea leaves. Sometimes you write an article and it doesn't do that fantastically. And then other times it can have a real impact. But I do think that positioning yourself as an authoritative voice on a certain topic is only going to grow more important in your careers. And also I just think it's the right thing to do. I mean, the arse has fallen out of trust in the media, right? Like nobody trusts the media anymore. And like, you can kind of understand why. So, and it's really hard to find trustworthy information on the internet. So at a time like that, people do still trust academics. You know, there's these polls done by Roy Morgan and all of those polling companies about the most trusted careers, and like nurses are right up the top, journalists are way down the bottom, but academics are in the top 10. You know, people trust what you guys have to say, and that is really important because, yeah, people are not getting good information these days, and I almost feel like academics have a duty to kind of, yeah, be voices that you know, readers can rely on when they don't know what to believe.
We agree. Yep, that's how we believe the program should go. Yep, totally.
Any other questions? No. Oh, all right. Good.
Yeah, we've hit 3 o'clock, so we'd love to give you a round of applause. Does everyone want to unmute themselves, and let's see how that sounds actually. Unmute all. All right, everyone, count of 3, give Sunny a round of applause.
Thank you, guys. I'm embarrassed.
They're like coming through one clap at a time.
That was awful. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to the end. My presentation is with Alex and Jack, and
Sorry. Sorry, Sunny.
it's rude.
Sorry.
It's sexist.
Jack just muted you.
All right. all I was saying was thanks very much, and yeah, pitch the conversation when you are doing your PhDs, and wash your hands, and stay well. Okay. All right.
Thanks
I'm
so
gonna leave.
much, Sunny.
Go back to editing. All right. Bye. See you.
See you.
Bye.
So the rest of you guys should stick around if you can. We should have a brief follow-up chat if you want. Totally up to you now. Like we've got another hour ahead of us if you want, or we can just break early. Like it's kind of, you guys should lead.
We could at the very least have a 5-minute breather. Should we do that? Have a 5-minute breather, and then if you have any questions, a bunch of you will be in tutorial with Marina this afternoon. It's worth reporting that we had a really fun tute this morning, thanks to all those guys who were there. So I expect you guys in the afternoon will have an equally valuable tute. But should we just take 5 minutes? Then anyone who wants to come back to ask questions, Alex and I'll be here.
Cool.
Let's call it 3:10. It's about 3:05 now.
Sounds good.
All right.